We are joined from Turkey today by Anil of FoXnoMad, a blog I have read for years, and my first chance to get to talk with him. He said he doesn't accept too many invitations, but somehow I worded it correctly. I think it was the Star Trek reference, but
That helped. Yeah.
we will dive in. Turkey, I was thinking of, I've had one trip, other than many transits of Istanbul. I had one trip where I drove across the southern part of the country. So I started in Van and drove all the way through the south, along the coast, Kurdish areas, up the coast, up through Gallipoli, around. I mean, it's the trip that I had planned and wanted and loved. And one thing I was thinking about it is digital nomads, this culture of looking for alternative places to live. Istanbul looms so large, but I saw a number of incredible cities. And your perspective as both Turkish and American, what are some of the other spots of Turkey that would make a great base for somebody?
So I think, Istanbul is a great base. I think a lot of people who come here see really Beyoğlu Taksim area and Sultanahmet. And so they get this idea, and those are really like Times Square-ish. I
Hmm.
think in Istanbul, though, you have a lot of places that you can really get a local feeling. It's much calmer, much more authentic. So Istanbul is great. I'll say that, and close to the world, basically. It's such a good airport. But Izmir is a beautiful city, like amazing. It's a really great city. So I think that Izmir is a good choice. Most people like to go along the coast. Izmir is good. There's a couple of small towns along that coast. It depends on what you want, but that are like an hour south, maybe hour and a half, that are good. So I think those would be all great for a digital nomad base. Um,
What about when I was driving and took the ferry? I apologize the pronunciation, but Kanakali,
mhm.
the that town. It seemed like it was a very young population. And when I looked at the map, it looked like there were a lot of schools. And it seemed like a fun, bustling place. But I was truly just driving through to catch a ferry.
Yeah, I mean, really the demographics for the entire west basic coast, just going down, is pretty young. It's pretty, you know, I sound like an old man now, but I am. So I'll say that I think there's this sort of push to be modern and unique. And so you feel like this sort of liveliness in these kind of
Mhm.
cities
Mhm.
up and down the West Coast, I think.
Hmm. Fantastic. And I think like my home country of the United States, I think political news has loomed large and been somewhat negative of Turkey as well. But as I said, it struck me as a place that I would seriously like to live for at least a year or two at some point. And I haven't seen as much written about the feasibility of that, say U.S. or EU citizens.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about it, but I do know that the country really wants tourists. It really needs money.
Mhm.
My guess is that it's not going to be, or it's not too difficult
Mhm.
to do it. I think right now you have a lot of advantages. The thing about Turkish culture is it's sort of it's hard to keep it in one place. So it's
Mhm.
always kind of shifting. So if the news
Mhm.
is bad, the news tends to get better. If it's good, it tends to get worse. It, it fluctuates. And I think a lot of the politics, for somebody who's living here, who's not from here,
Mhm.
you know, probably would be very, kind of invisible to you, I think.
Mhm.
So I think it's a good time now. Is it, it's not very expensive. And things feel like they're changing lately. Just, so
Mhm.
um yeah, I think, and I think too, seeing a place, you realize, in every country that the politics is so different when you just talk to like regular people.
Oh yeah.
From what you see from politicians and on the news is so different. So, and I think Turkey is a really ideal case of that.
Yeah, I'm thinking to my road trip a few years ago. I mean, these were areas with many military checkpoints, and never one was anybody other than extremely courteous. And whether it's soldiers down to locals, I've felt welcome everywhere. Looking for a UNESCO site, I drove my car into a ditch and some farmers pulled it out. I mean, there's a incredible
I j-
hospitality. And
I just put on my recent sort of place that I have to go, and I've kind of moved it up on the list because if anything, coronavirus lockdowns have taught me it's if
mm,
you want to go somewhere, try to push it up on the list. But it's called Göbekli Tepe, which is in the southeast of the country. So it's I think it's the very first human settlement ever. I
yeah,
think it's about 12,000 years before the present. And so it's an archaeological site, but they're building a museum now in the area. But you can visit it now. And I've been to a lot of these sites around Turkey over the years. So that's just one place that I really want to visit. It just seems uh, fascinating. There's so much to see. There's so much history here, and so yeah, there's a lot to see here that most people miss because it's hard to avoid Istanbul, Pamukkale and Cappadocia. Those if you come here and don't see those things, it's
yeah,
almost a shame. So so it's like going to India and not seeing the Taj Mahal. It's just kind of it's worth seeing if that many people go to a place. I think.
yeah. The site you mentioned, I have visited, and it's incredible. As you said, it's perhaps the first city in a sense in the history of the world, and they have several different sites that are domed over. That it's an extensive area, and as I recall, it's almost like 5 levels. Like they were building skyscrapers with the technology. It isn't like it was just a few huts together. I mean, really impressive. And then Nemrut way in the east, which is why I started visiting the east. These incredible stone heads, essentially on the top of a mountain. Some incredible spots, way out of the way that really got me. But yeah, part of the reason I'd like to move is I know my wife would love the food, and food is the number one for her. So that's
It's a great place to eat. It really is. Food is, yeah, it's a great place to eat. So yeah, I mean, this the cuisine variety here too. It's also one of those things where most people just think it's kebab, because
mm,
that's what's exported out of here mostly. But
mhm,
the
mhm,
food is kebab is really a thing that's sort of a special occasion food that you eat when you go out. I mean, most people they don't eat that at home. Those are kind of the special foods, but the actual home cooking, those kind of foods are so varied, and it comes from, we did a lot of conquering, and one of the side effects of that is cuisine, is mixing of all these cultures and getting all this food. So um, it's you can kind of trace the history based on the region of the food. You can really see it.
fantastic. And I was impressed that so many cities, places have these museum passes, and they almost always exclude everything you really want to see. And yet Turkey has both city level, or actually city level, regional, and then a countrywide. And the countrywide I picked it up in Ankara on a flight connection, and it was, I mean, from the Hagia Sophia down to Mosaic Museum and museums in Gaziantep. I mean, it included, I think, everything except one of the museums in Gallipoli. It was just incredible value, and incredibly easy to have that pass and explore so much around. So it really, I found it a much easier and carefree travel experience than I had expected.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to get around. I think for road trips, pretty much most of the country is, obviously not before lockdowns, but which are pretty much over now at this point, really
Mm,
here. It's pretty easy to get around most anywhere. I think Black Sea Coast is a trip that everybody should do, go from Istanbul, follow along the north coast. It's plenty of places to stop and see different culture, different food, different landscapes. Um, yeah, it's a great road tripping kind of country. People within the country move around a lot. So you find like now, as soon as the lockdown ended here, pretty much everybody I know in Istanbul was at the beach now. It was just pretty much just left at the first opportunity. So you know, a lot of people do move around within the country, which is nice, but a lot of, you know, foreigners coming here don't really, you know, get outside of the common triangle.
And I was just replying in the comments. So I actually confused two sites that I had visited. So you mentioned Gobekli Tepe, and that I have visited, and that is very cool. And I've also visited way to the west, Kettle Hoyak, which was the ancient city I was referring to. So I got them such a bunch of wonders that I confused them. So I put both links in the show notes so people can see both sites.
Yeah, Chatal Hayuk, I went, I want to say when 1998, maybe 99 or something like that. And we were just, we were just driving through the area and I saw a sign and I was like, hey, I've read about it. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that can't be. It was just this rusted sign in the middle of nowhere. And so I told my uncle I was like, do you mind if we? He was like, yeah, we'll go. And there was one guard just sitting there doing nothing. And I
Mm,
think the British researchers who basically were running it had gone home for, you know, for a break or something. I don't know what, you know, holiday or whatever. And so the guy was like, yeah, you can just look around. So he basically just unlocked all the things and we walked around. We saw all
mm,
the,
wow.
I don't know if they still have it, but whoever those people were at that time would bury the remains of their family members in their homes,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I remember there was one that was a baby, and I'll never, I just, for some reason that stuck in my mind, and I was thinking,
Mm,
I wonder what those people believed. You know,
mm,
why would they do that? You know, was there some
mm,
practical purpose maybe?
mm.
But it seems like an odd place to keep bodies. So it was just, it's just one of those places that, yeah, it's fascinating. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but
Oh, that's fantastic, and
plenty of
that's how I
sites.
felt driving around the country. And I'll go again, and I'll go through the north more. I mean, it is this incredible variety and resource, and of course, we're all hoping travel will open up again. I'll pivot to you started podcasting last December, and your very first episode caught my eye, and it's yeah, this is the group to speak to. So it was travel bloggers in Syria. And that was the teaser. So I opened it up. Full disclosure, I traveled to Syria last August. That was my UN 193. So I am complicit if I'm guilty, and but I'm curious to hear your take and thoughts and genesis of having that lead as your first episode.
So, so the idea to do a podcast I had for about 2 years, and I tried it various different ways with different people, and it never worked. And I was like, if I'm gonna do it, I'll just do it myself. That's how it started.
Mm,
And what kind of was the catalyst was I see some things online that I just think like that's, you know. So I think Johnny Ward, I think, is the name. I once I write it or I do it, I forget names, but so he had run a tour to Syria, which I think is fine going to Syria, to be honest. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But there were these sort of these photos of people, you know, in front of Bashar al-Assad doing thumbs up signs and it just looked odd considering what's happening in the country. So, you know, I wanted to basically talk about, you know, what life, you know, what people are going through, what the different bloggers and vloggers who had been there. So I wanted to speak about their impressions and you know, it was just a sort of to say you, you can, I don't know if it was very tasteful is kind of
mm,
my understanding, but again, I don't know, maybe there was a government handler there and that they had to take such photos, or it just seemed very odd to me. And I think it, you know, it's like going to North Korea, for example. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think if anything, even if in a condition where you have somebody from the government watching you and you know what you're seeing is not what life is really like there, I think that interaction even changes you as the traveler, but also changes even the people you interact with, whatever capacity they're in. So I think it's ultimately a good thing. I think people mixing is always a good thing. I mean, I think, we progress like that. But I think the pictures of just sort of the thumbs up was how I just went on to this, this bigger question of, if you're going to a country that has whatever kind of government, whatever that is, are you supporting that? Are you like, if you go to Saudi Arabia, for example, does
Mhm.
that mean you support everything the government does? And obviously not. But, I've been to Cuba, for example, so you can make the argument that my money is going to a government that's, does all these things. And, but I think that's true of anywhere, right? So I think my thinking was, it's important to show what it's really like there. And
Mm.
I don't think his posts did that. I don't think, you know, I, I think it's interesting that, like, for example, bars are open there and people are still going out in
Mhm.
Damascus. I think that's fascinating. I mean, it really is interesting. But to say that that's a reflection of the country, on a larger scale, I don't think it's accurate. So, but I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you've been there, so I don't know if you've grappled with this. I mean, I think we all have, going to certain
Mhm.
places, and what do we want to share about a place? You know.
Yeah, I went 2010. When I went to North Korea, I grappled with that a lot and wrote about it at the time because that's one that one of the lines of argument about using as much of your money to get to locals rather than a regime, say that people would argue, say in the context of Myanmar or Burma, North Korea, that doesn't really apply. The money you spend is all going to the government. Potentially some tips you give, it's hard to say where that ends up. But uh, I suppose the one nuance that I can offer as a traveler is the feeling that you hinted at of when I've been in countries, I've never felt that the people are unhappy that I'm there. Where, say, the emigres or the international community might have extremely negative views or very strong feelings about boycotts or travel, but people anywhere in the world want to love their country, want to like where they are, want to have connections to people, and to whatever degree there is that ability to interact with people, however mediated it is or limited it is. And even in North Korea, it was still possible to go to parks where it's the old guys who don't give a shit that are playing cards in the park, and that's not staged. I mean, these are just and the grannies play this like dice game, and nobody's staging them. They're just at the park and they don't, and I don't speak Korean, they don't speak English, but that smile. I mean, there's some value to it, and certainly say back to Myanmar. I was living in China at the time, which is its own thing, but you go to Myanmar at 10 years ago, and the massive investment from Chinese companies for logging and resources and all that, you know that that's a giant impact compared to what tourists are doing with their limited funds. But hopefully tourists are some positive force in interaction.
Yeah, and I don't think, honestly, that tourists not going to a place, like, we all
Mm.
just boycott a specific country. I don't think that's going to make really a difference, even in a country that relies heavily on tourism. But countries that rely heavily on tourism, do change. I mean, there are reason why certain countries limit tourists. I mean, they make it really difficult to go
Mhm.
there with the visa process. There's a reason for that, for sure. So, but I think, just if everybody boycotted XYZ country, I don't think that's gonna really make a difference. So it's the people that live there that ultimately change what happens there, So, and yeah, I think you might have a small interaction with a shop owner, or, when I went to Cuba, and the thing I noticed about those old cars was, most of them are broken down in the street somewhere. Those things were breaking down all over the place. And the really nice, shiny ones you see are in a very small part of town. Most people are not driving those really well
Okay.
maintained ones. And I found that fascinating. And I think that gave me a perspective of, okay, so people are using these old cars because they have to. They don't really have a choice. But at the same time, the ingenuity of making those cars just run, I think, says something about that culture. I really, I just think that. So, and I learned that, and I don't know if anybody learned anything from me there, but I certainly learned that leaving there. So I think it had a positive effect on me. So,
Yeah, and your discussion about Syria and Debjit in the comments is mentioning that he doesn't think any guide in Syria will force you to take pictures in front of Bashar's photo, and that certainly, I mean, that was my experience. That in fact, the guides were very open and taking to very damaged areas and even villages like why this minaret was damaged and this and that. I mean, it really, people's, any guide you're dealing with, their families have been affected. They've lost people. And it wasn't something that it was whitewashed at all in my experience. Uh, yeah, I was thinking, you mentioning those pictures. I've taken fewer and fewer pictures of myself, and I'm thinking like when I visited Auschwitz and people are taking these smiling photos in front of the gates, and I'm just, I just that thought process. I can understand, I guess, why it happens, but also that, as Devjit's saying, losing that sense of critical inquiry of why are you taking a smiling photo in front of Auschwitz gate?
yeah, I mean, there's taking photos. I understand. Even taking pictures with you there. I understand why people do that, but
Yeah,
some of them are like over the like when you're posing for these glamorous selfies or something like that in a place like Auschwitz or where a place like that is it just then it's the room for benefit of the doubt is basically just evaporates. You have to be mindful, I think, of what's happening. And when I see those kind of pictures, I think that person is missing the story there, but what's really happening. It's just otherwise I don't think you could take a picture like that really if you think about it, I guess. Not to be super critical. I mean, we've all done dumb things, but
yeah, yeah.
um I think, yeah, so I think I thought it was worth pointing out.
Oh, fantastic. And talk about your philosophy of travel. How do you get the point of something, or how do you interact with the destination?
Interesting. So I guess when I go somewhere new, I sort of start with the kind of the assumptions that I have, so the basic,
Hmm.
whatever that might be. I was in Pakistan recently, earlier in the year, and that was safety and security. Those are things that come to your mind: terrorism, safety, security. And so when I went there, I was in Islamabad first, and it was absolutely nothing like I expected at all in pretty much any any regard. And so for me, the idea of the story there was this contrast of this is not the place I expected. So I'm assuming many other people don't expect the place like this. So that's what I want to see. So they had these American restaurants, for example, in Islamabad, like so almost themed. It was almost like a theme park. And so I was like, well, I'll go there, see what that's like, and see what the people there are like, and so on and so on. So I kind of go with this general idea of what my assumptions are. When I get there, I usually take the first day or two to figure out what do I want to write about, what do I want to video. But unfortunately, my brain works like that. So, and then I just kind of go from there. It really depends on the place. I think for me, I'm most interested in the culture of a place. Is I'm just fascinated. Like, why do some people put milk in tea and others don't? Or why do all of these kind of things? Why do we stand closer to each other in some countries but not others? All those little random things I find just absolutely fascinating. So it just kind of goes from there.
It seems like picking the thread of some of these very small details. I'm thinking of when I lived in China and would visit friends' homes, and You use the restroom and accidentally dry my hands because they have like 8 different towels. And at first I didn't know that each family member has their own face towel, their own hand towel in Shanghai. It's very specific, and it's like you touch the wrong one and you almost get kicked out of the house. And it's these that little thread somehow pulls out a broader cultural story.
Yeah, like in Istanbul, for example, and Turkey in general, people are very germ phobic. Very, very cleanliness is a big deal here. So like cleaning your house, restaurant, like
Hmm.
everything is, so was very well prepared mentally for Corona,
Hmm.
changes. And the reason for that is because in the 15 and 1600s, the bubonic plague
Mm.
swept through Istanbul multiple times, wiped out huge chunks of the population. And it kept happening because it was such a center of everything, and there's so many people living on top of each other basically, that fast forward a couple hundred years later, and now you have this culture that's very conscious about cleanliness, to the point where you walk in people's homes and they pour lemon cologne, like a sort of alcohol based lemon scented cologne, in your hands, which is so standard. It's just pretty much so standard, and it really bases itself on what happened, over time. And so I find that just absolutely, for me, fascinating, that you can have this many people on the planet, and we're all like, when it comes to what matters, we're the same.
Mhm.
But when it comes to all these other things, the way we show things, like the way we, show affection to our family members, for example, that varies around the world. But everybody loves their family. It's pretty standard, and so on. So for me, like I'm just absolutely fascinated.
And I did see a lot of coverage about the Turkey and the Cologne battling coronavirus. And I've thought if you want quirky ways to categorize the world, you could say there's deodorant countries and there's cologne countries. And so to talk about that culture of cologne and perfume in Turkey for people that have an interest as a tourist, as a shopper, as everyday life. I mean, it clearly is a very central part of the rituals.
Yeah, I mean, when coronavirus first started, when it was, first sort of shutting places down in Turkey here, it was in the news and on social media, people were making fun of it, like, oh, it'll never happen here. We're immune.
Mm.
And then it came, and then people got into this panic, and the lemon cologne, it's basically alcohol scented with lemon, kind of, I guess you can call it. First, it was sold out everywhere. You couldn't find it. And then where you could find it, the price was like 10 times what it normally was. It was like the most valuable thing. And it's so common. I mean, if you walk into somebody's home as a guest, chances are you'll get lemon cologne on your hands. If you ride a bus here, if you've flown, I think Turkish Airlines does it too. Um, they'll pour cologne on your hand and just wipe it. And basically, it's just disinfecting your hands, and it smells nice. Barbershops, all sorts of places. So it's just this thing that I never thought was kind of odd, but I don't know if anybody else around the world has that specific thing, where you basically, somebody comes to your house and you disinfect their hands when they come in. It's just, I never thought of it as a disinfectant. It never occurred to me that that's where that came from. I just figured it smells nice. Little did I know.
Devjit is saying earlier this year, flying into Beirut, some guy next to him just sprayed him with perfume without asking first. So now he now he knows.
It's just disinfecting you. That's all.
And I think that was before the virus stuff. So something. uh, that's great. And another aspect of travel that you've tapped into, I think that I felt in my business career is the experience of traveling for conventions or fandom, which for say our audience that's looking to go to every country in the world, it's like, oh, some people are like, I'll never go to Disneyland, I'll never go to this or that. But you think of something like a Star Trek convention, that is the annual travel for a lot of people. And I will share my bias. The Star Trek original series was one of about 3 TV shows my father would let me watch growing up, and even for years we didn't have a TV. So I'm very much in the pro Star Trek camp. your profile picture is you at a Star Trek convention. So to talk about that theme and also broadly the value of, even if you're not interested in the subject, going to a fan style convention.
Yeah, so I think if you're not a fan, I think what's cool about it is one, the cosplay, like everybody, not everybody, but even at Star Trek conventions, more and more people are dressed in more and more elaborate just
Mm,
costumes, and it's kind of cool to walk around. Especially, I go to the convention in Las Vegas pretty much every year, so
mhm,
it's really interesting to see like a Starfleet officer and a Klingon and some alien that's just made some guy made up playing
mhm,
craps and losing all their money at the craps table. It was just it's so bizarre. But I think also it's William Shatner did a documentary on conventions, and he came to the conclusion that people go for the ritual. They go to see the
mhm,
people at the convention that they meet over the years, and less about the actors and all of that. So I think if you're not a fan, there's this sort of visual aspect to it that's really cool. I mean, like just I think just seeing people in cosplay is great. Usually, people are like acting out scenes just randomly in convention halls.
mhm,
There are all these themed you think of it and they're doing it. So I think it's fun from that regard. You also get to see super fans, people that are so into something, like crying, like that kind of super fan.
mhm.
I'm not there yet, and so you see that. I think culturally, it's just fascinating just to see it. And if you're a fan, you should definitely go. It's so much. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's just and it's not what people think. It's not, it's not like, there aren't. It's mostly just people hanging out, really. And there's a couple of talks that people go to, but it's mostly just people hanging out. And sometimes they'll go listen to one of the actors take questions. But honestly, once you've been to one convention, you see one actor, they pretty much answer everything that you've ever wondered about the show. So it's really just hanging out with the other Star Trek fans.
Yeah, I'm thinking where I live now, Seattle, they have the Emerald City Comic Con, and the ticket is quite expensive just to get into the show floor. But I just passed through downtown and just, as you said, watch the cosplay go by me. I don't even need to be on the show floor to to just be amazed at how Seattle for a few days of the year trades flannels and yoga pants for for something a bit more lively.
And it's crazy what a worldwide phenomenon it is. I mean, I've been to comic conventions and Star Trek conventions in a bunch of different countries. And it's so amazing that how kind of similar they are.
Mm,
Really, like, I went to a Comic Con in Sofia in Bulgaria. And honestly, that could have been San Diego. It could have been UK. It could have been Germany. It could have been Australia. It's it's almost like when people are there, there's this sort of nerddom,
mhm,
and that's pretty consistent, at least from the conventions and comic cons that I've been to, which I find really interesting. You find, I remember at one went to in Eastern Europe, it's just people just drinking a bunch of vodka and smoking cigarettes. Okay, you don't see that everywhere in the world,
mhm.
but just really like talking in depth about Batman the animated series, like really to a degree that I didn't think was possible. And it was just great. It was like it's still kind of has these aspects of the local culture, but it's also part of this bigger sort of cultural thing. So I find that interesting.
There any particular of the events that you've been to that you'd highlight as this great mix of destination and convention experience?
Yeah, I think I hate to say it too because I'm not a big fan of the company that runs it, but the Las Vegas Star Trek convention. I
Mm,
think if you're a Star Trek fan, that's the one to go to because you have Vegas. It seems to draw, I mean, it's got the biggest crowd. It's got sort of, you got the casino, the convention, and you're in the same hotel if you
mhm.
do it right. And then there are all these like side parties going on, but it's all within this small walking indoor area. And it's just a lot of fun that way. So I think Vegas would probably be the best one to go to.
And why Star Trek? I said you don't need to sell me, but people that just they've never seen an episode. They have some pop culture images, but it's daunting to engage with yet another series and subculture.
So I've been thinking about this. I was thinking about the new series that have come out in the last few years, and they're okay, entertaining, but they're not like the 60s or the 90s tricks, you know. And I think the reason is because you watch those shows and you see, you see Spock or you see Janeway or you see Geordi, you see these characters that is like an engineer or a science officer, and you really go, that would be if I could live any job, it would be a science officer on a starship in
Mm,
Star Trek. That would be my fantasy job. Maybe because you can travel, you're studying things that nobody has seen before that are completely novel.
mm,
And there's so these aspects of it that I really found fascinating watching it, as a kid and growing up. And I think that's what appeals to me. It's basically kind of what I do now. Like I kind of travel and I write about it and I go to these places where I'm sort of an outsider and sort of an alien, if you will. And I think that's what appeals to me. And I also really like the positive aspect of it because you know I we're all on this planet together, and I really believe we have to either figure it out or it's probably going to end pretty terribly for the human species. So the I like the aspect that people have kind of figured it out. So and that they do things that we wouldn't do. You see some of the decisions in those earlier Star Treks, and you're like, that's what an advanced human being would probably do.
mm.
But one of us would probably just go, just shoot them all, or whatever the situation is, and so I kind of find that
The
aspect.
recent Discovery feels at times that it feels like it's a shoot 'em all yeah,
Yeah,
at moments. But yeah, I mean certainly in the United States, the social impact of the decisions they made in the '60s, the '80s, '90s. I mean that it's easy to exaggerate the effect of different kinds of pop culture, but I think in the case of the casting and the values that they've espoused, it really does deserve the attention and acclaim it gets for what it accomplished.
there's I don't think she's still there. I think she's back on Earth, but there was a Italian scientist, I think she's Italian, that was on the International Space Station,
Mm.
and she wore a Starfleet uniform up there. So clearly the show has had, this impact, and she's quoting it too and taking pictures and posting them on Twitter. And I was like, that's just, kind of cool to me. I'm like, oh, and
And I was horrified that the U.S. Space Force ripped off the logo. I mean, that's
at one point I'm like, okay, it's kind of cool. It is the Starfleet logo. Like,
yeah.
I like the step, but it's also the Starfleet logo, So,
So
um,
how do you think of yourself? You grew up between Turkey and United States, as I understand from your writing. How do you think about what you are?
oh boy, I don't even know how to answer the question, to be honest. Yeah, it's a difficult one because also now I've been traveling really for over 10 years. I've been moving around a lot. So there's that aspect that's to it. So I have this, on top of all of that, I have this sort of experience which most people don't have.
Hmm.
And so it can be this kind of odd thing where, I'm like, hey, I'm leaving for 3 months. I'm gonna go live in, Scotland, and like that's not normal for most people. It probably shouldn't be normal for me either, but it happens. So I don't really I don't really know. I think I spent a lot of time maybe when I was younger trying to figure out what that is. And I think the way you figure that out is to just keep doing what you're doing. You get the answer is always you at the moment, I think. So
Or
trying to
multiple
spend
answers? It doesn't need to be one answer.
exactly, yeah. So I just kind of yeah, this weird thing. I'm okay with that.
So for the why don't Americans get XYZ type thing that the rest of the world pretty much always asks at our craziness, what could you impart to, I was thinking in terms of, say, recent high school graduates. My two nieces, Iowa City, Iowa, they just had their non-graduation of high school. A lot of people their age thinking about gap year traveling, that the typical American hasn't had many overseas experiences. Uh, with your background and different experiences, what would you tell that group that travel is turned off, the politics is in flux? Any thoughts that your perspective would add?
Yeah, so if you're young, I would say it's an educational experience for sure. Like it's a mental workout. Just traveling, just getting to the airport and going through, dealing with that, and then arriving in a place and figuring it out is really a good mental workout. Just for that pure fact alone, it's something that's worth doing. And I think the more you understand about different people, it's sort of like, when you're in school and you're learning some weird math formula, like when will I ever use this thing? But
Mm-hmm.
it's more about a mode of using your brain in different ways, so it's versatile in other areas, as you grow. So I think travel is kind of the same thing. So if you and if you live in the United States, it's hard to leave. I get that, because we call it the United States, but it's just it's massive. What is it? Alaska, Hawaii, Maine. I mean, all these environments and cultures, and so yeah, I think it can only benefit you to see what people are like around the world, what countries and governments are doing right and doing wrong, and it helps you appreciate both where you're from and see where changes could be made. It to not want to travel, I think we're all kind of born with the desire to want to explore. And for a lot of people, that gets lost somewhere along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to go, halfway across the planet. I mean, in the US, you can go pretty far away from home and see a lot of things. So I think I would say, for parents that, probably encouraging that exploration, because as you get older, you have these fears, especially even when I'm traveling now, I think about things I did 10 years ago. I'm like, that could have gone really wrong. It didn't. And I probably think about it more now. But I think when you're young, you don't have those barriers. And it's good to kind of go with that. So you can't lose. I mean, learning math, you might not ever use it, but it's not going to hurt you. It can
Yeah,
only really benefit you, for example.
excellent, delightful
So,
answer. And you have a stated goal of traveling to every country in the world, and I get the sense it's an open timeline.
yeah.
Your experiences have been a lot of Europe, Asia so far. It seems like less, say, in Latin America and the Pacific. How are you thinking about, let's say, the next decade of travel?
Yeah. So 2020 was going to be my year of really putting a dent into the map and try to get to a lot of places, especially sub-Saharan Africa, which I haven't been to,
Okay.
and these sort of different places. But I find myself returning to places. Pakistan is a country that fascinated me, so it's a place I really want to go back to. India, I've been close to 20 times.
Wow.
It's a place that just keeps bringing me back. It's and to see the changes over time is also another thing. So I do want to see all the countries. So I like having a goal in mind. Um, but I do tend to go back to places more now. So in trying to see more cities in a place as opposed to just getting across the border. But yeah, that's my plans for this year. Like pretty much everybody else has kind of stopped. So I got lucky. I got a good set of travels in basically the first 6 to 8 weeks of the year, and so
In thinking of those 20 visits to India, I've had a long running discussion with a friend who my approach is I travel like I may never go back to a place, but I may want to. And his approach is he always travels like he's always going to go back. and different thoughts. So what would you see on the 21st trip to India that maybe should really be what people see on their first or second?
Hmm. I think one, you don't, it when you go to a place multiple times, one, you don't have the burden of seeing the sights that you have to see. And I mean burden in that sense. Taj Mahal, been there, I've seen it multiple times. Uh, I don't need to go to India and see it again. So that gives you more time and more flexibility in your planning, to see other things. Maybe parts of the country that as a new traveler you'd be intimidated to go to because you don't know how things work. You want to stay close to these sites that you want to see. So I think what you get in a place after 20 times or multiple times is you get this comfort with it, and you can skip all the worrying about like getting scammed. You know what to look out for. You're not
Mm-hmm.
at the Taj Mahal. Instead, you're most likely at a tea shop spending like hours just hanging out. And in those moments you get conversations with shop owners, conversations with people maybe sitting around you. Maybe you go that trip with friends, and then instead of looking at it as a sightseeing tour, you just go, we're going to hang out in the city. We've all been here, we've all seen it before, but now we can just spend a day talking to people, and kind of get this layer that is hard to get to on your very first trip, or on a shorter trip, I'd say.
Excellent. And maybe we should just pivot totally to the most superficial. So I'm going to share a link with how every traveler influencer ever video
Oh god.
as a segue to the business of blogging and all of that. So there's always curiosity. You're doing this full time for a decade. So you're figuring out ways. I'm going to share links to apps you've built, gear you share. A lot. The travel blogs I read are, I'd say, usually thoughtful and practical people. So you tick both boxes for me of
Thank you.
actionable information that whether it's the best VPNs and why VPNs or thoughtful things as we've been discussing. So talk about uh, your business. You're not the bikini yoga pose on the beach Instagrammer. So there is another way.
There yeah, sometimes I make just videos that are just dumb and for me, and I'm like, no, just put that out there. Yeah, so I guess everything all right, not okay, maybe not everything. I try to keep to the basically the tagline of my site from the beginning, which is travel smarter. So if I'm making a video or a blog post or a whatever, I try, for me, I'm like, what would they get out of it? And I hope it's always to travel smarter in some way, whatever that happens to be.
Mm,
So that's always really the goal. What's the problem and how do you solve it? Or what to be aware of. I just, it's really classic, like, set up conflict resolution
mm,
almost. Um, and I think, that comes from my computer background, that's how my mind works. I like to know how things work, and I like sharing. Once you figure out how it works, you can break it. And I like sharing that, so you can kind of hack the system in a way. So yeah, but sometimes I put on a blonde wig and I and I scream I scream in an empty apartment. But I think you might learn something from it, maybe.
And that does seem, I mean, I'm mystified by the travel vlogging area, so to speak, and people that have had great success. I guess I'll say I'm not the target audience, and what you work in these different platforms. You've talked about vlogging. You have the tech. So talk about different approaches that maybe that someone to my eyes might feel like is a bit gimmicky, the kind of very exaggerated stuff. That's not you, except maybe when you're having fun. So your
Yeah.
thoughts on vlogging insanity.
Yeah, a lot of times, when I make something, I never go, I wonder how many people are gonna react to this or see it. I'm just like, I think that's cool or useful,
Mhm.
and I just do it, and we'll see. So, um, and I've recently, in the last 2 years or so, been doing a lot more video. I committed to doing, at some point in the last year and a half or so, doing 2 videos a week. It's something I always wanted to do, but I don't. I'm used to it now, but I don't like being in front of the camera. I get
Mm,
nervous. I calculated the other day that whatever video I make takes roughly 4 times the amount of just recording myself. So if
mm,
you see a 10-minute video, uh, on average, recording about 40 to 45 minutes
mm,
of me talking. And it's usually either me messing up or just rambling, which obviously everybody now can see I do. So, but I feel like if I explain a tech product, if there's a new device or there's something, explaining it on video is just so much. It's natural. It's just a natural extension. So I wanted to do that, and I figured, why not? Like everything, if you do it enough times, you get used to it. You learn. So now being in front of the camera is not such a big deal. And the podcast, again, is a place that's for something I can't really do on my blog, and doesn't really fit so much on YouTube, like
mhm,
talking about what my thoughts on those Syria photos. That was those 20 minutes of talking about that, and the place for it seemed to be podcasting. So I thought that seems, maybe interesting, and maybe I'll have people to come on and share things to talk about, in a longer format. So it's kind of, and it also helps keep me motivated. So I'm still writing. I still write twice a week, but having these different ways to explain something is kind of fun.
oh, excellent. And it seems like that. Yeah, you're talking about a stretch of over a decade. That motivation is certainly a challenge for anybody that's, I suppose, especially starting out, right? It's that you have that first burst of activity, and then you don't see the results you're dreaming of, and then it's like, oh, am I going to do this for another 5, 8, 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, consistency has really worked out for me as sort of a plan. Um, and the first time you do something is probably you're gonna be the worst at it. Then if you do anything, you're just gonna get better at it the more you do it. And if you're consistent, that turns it into a routine, which makes it easier on the days that you don't want to do it.
Hmm.
So there's plenty of days I don't want to do whatever I have to do, but like I've set, like every country in the world, that's a tangible goal. 2 videos a week, tangible. There are these
Hmm.
sort of goals I can hit, big and small, and you know, and if you do that enough, sometimes, if you write something that's terrible, you make a video that nobody watches, it's like, move on to the next one. You don't have time to worry to sit on it too long. So
And app designer as well. I've shared the link for your apps. Talk about being a travel app designer. Again, solving practical problems is how I think of your apps.
yeah, so the my first app was is what app called WiFox, which is basically has all the airport lounge and hidden network passwords for 1,300 airports now around the world. Originally, I think in 2011 or 12 or 13, I had a list on my site where I was just posting all
Mhm,
these passwords that I was coming across. And then a reader said to me, "Hey, you should make that a map." And I didn't do that for over a year. I was like, "Yeah, okay, whatever. Like, who's
mhm,
gonna do that?" So I made the map, um, and it became really popular. A lot of people viewed it, and then somebody said, "You should make that an app. It'd be handy to have that offline."
mhm,
And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just sit on it."
mhm,
And eventually, I made the app, and it went pretty viral. And then I was like, "Yeah, this is really helpful to have this information." So I've made five other apps that help. Let's say if you have a drone, there's one that has all the drone laws. There's one where you can find out whether you can drink the tap water somewhere. So they solve all these kind of practical problems, like how much to tip at a
mhm,
barber shop in Istanbul. Most people, and you've got it all offline. So I wanted to make sure that everything works offline,
mhm.
because the internet is a pain when you're traveling in general. So that you have all that information, and they're updated pretty much daily at this point. WiFox is daily, but
Oh,
tipping culture doesn't change too frequently. But WiFox is
I
pretty
was
much a
gonna ask
daily
about
update.
the updating process, so that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, WiFox daily. DroneMate is depends on the drone laws, and they tend to change around the world in
Really?
fall, fall, and New Year. So it's like September is a big time, May and June, and then January 1st, a whole bunch of things get enacted,
Hmm.
whatever they happen to be. So, and then yeah, faucet safe, same thing, updated. I'm just adding water tests from around the world pretty much constantly. So
And grass fox as well. So that's an
yeah,
extension. And
so the idea for grass fox, which is marijuana laws, recreational marijuana laws around the world, was I was in Montevideo in Uruguay, and I was sitting on a corner with a friend, and everywhere smelled like weed in the whole. I mean, it was like crazy in the city, and I was thinking, this is weird, and like you would see police, and they wouldn't bother people just smoking openly. And I was thinking, is it legal? Like, is this? It has to be. I mean, there's no way. And then I was thinking, well, that's an interesting question. I bet a lot of people have that same question, especially a lot of people traveling to, certain countries. And when you look into it, like a lot of places where you think like recreational marijuana is legal, it's not.
mm,
Um, in Uruguay, for example, they can't sell to foreigners. It was only for citizens. It's
ah,
technically it's illegal for foreigners. But and then in all these apps, there's a section which is here are the laws, but then here's how it's in practice. What's really happening.
yeah.
Like in off the top of my head, in Spain, it's technically illegal, but then there are these clubs that you can join.
Okay.
Basically, you pay for the club, but uh, you get something to smoke. So all the apps try to solve a problem that I've come across. Can I drink the water here? People will say, locals a lot of times will say, yeah, you can drink the water. And then, you do an independent water test and you're like, you can. It won't make you immediately sick, but it's probably not good for your long-term health, to be drinking these metals and,
Okay.
different stuff. So,
So
um,
how are you finding these data sources? Is this just these are public data sources, screen scraping, and
all kinds of ways.
mm,
Either, having water tests done for faucet safe legally. So contacts at literally every authority in every country that could possibly help with that. There are
mm,
contacts there, and so um, it's basically this. A lot of the work is up front, is just trying to figure out where to get the data, and then branching out on that. WiFox is mostly crowdsourced, but there are a few. I call them verifiers. So there are a couple of people that at busy airports, common hubs and things will verify passwords and so on. So, because there are a lot of apps that kind of do what WiFox does, but all the I've downloaded all of them, and the passwords are always wrong. So
mm,
WiFox, I always try to make sure that that the correct passwords are there. It doesn't always work because we can't always keep up with every single. As the password changes an hour later, chances are I don't have that information, but I want to make sure it's as soon as possible and as accurate as possible. And the same thing with the drone laws. If you just Google drone laws around the world, so many of the things that are there are just wrong. Like they're
mm.
just wrong. Um, and people will write me even in drone map and this. Well, no, I've seen people flying drones around here. I'm like, you've seen people doing it. That's helpful, but it's if a police stops you, they're going to confiscate it, or that's a military area. That's don't push your luck. You don't want to do it there, or so on. So
I've never had a drone. I am envious of pictures people share. It sounds like it's worth it, despite these hassles and
yeah, and they're getting really good and getting really small.
mm,
So you can get like a Mavic. I think Mavic Mini is $400. It's about the size of a phone. A little,
mm,
this thick. I don't know what that means on camera, but small enough to where, yeah, there's a lot of fun, and it's under 250 grams, which is kind of the international. Many countries use it as a limit for what drones need to be registered. And so
Oh,
DJI made the drone 249 grams, which they write huge on the side, 249 grams,
oh.
so that it's easier to travel with. So that's a good starter one, yeah, I would say. But you always want to check the laws, either on DroneMate, or the information is also on my site as well, for free, that you can bring your drone into a country. In Morocco, I think again, off the top of my head, in Morocco, they confiscate them at the airport. I think it's the same in the UAE. So you don't want to show up with your drone somewhere and then you can't even take your drone with you. So it's always good to check before you go.
Yeah, and I was thinking in terms of these long multi-country trips, what do people do if they've got one stop along the way that is not going to let it in?
I've had that happen. So I've been, my drone comes with me pretty much everywhere. And surprisingly, if you pack it right, most people don't care. Like they don't find it.
I see.
And I travel with a ton of electronics, but we get the drone separate, the battery separate, the controller separate, and I've never had this issue with somebody going. I was recently last year. I was in a country that I know doesn't allow drones in the country, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't leave it. It was sort of this multi-country trip, and they didn't notice. They took everything out except the drone. I couldn't believe it. I was like, "Are they trolling me? Like, is this real?" So, yeah,
So it's don't volunteer, but don't lie, I think is the
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're gonna, yeah.
I've shared your travel tech setup. It makes me feel better about my overpacking. I'm not a serious content creator like you. I noted maybe simple mind goes to the smallest things, that you actually carry a mouse pad, which many times my wife is so good at carrying a mouse pad, and I always forget, and then I'm looking for a magazine or something, and it's like, yeah, I should just bring the darn mouse pad.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny when you say that. Most people go, "You travel with a mouse pad?" I'm like, "Yeah, where else am I gonna put my mouse on? It's so much easier." Like, but it's a pain. It's a pain. I mean, this microphone is travels with me pretty much, yeah, a ton of stuff that I wish I didn't travel with, but I don't mind.
All right, and a VPN. If people are still not using VPNs, how can you shake some sense into them?
Yeah, there's pretty much no reason to not use a good VPN all the time. I think it's essential. Just if you have the internet, you should have a VPN. One, to prevent your internet service provider from spying on you and selling that data, from tracking, creating a profile about the kind of things you do online. If you travel and if you use the free airport Wi-Fi, the WiFox can help you with this. But if you use that network and you're not on a VPN, pretty much anyone on that network who knows what they're doing can see what you're browsing, and they might be able to set up a fake page and capture your information. There's all this kind of stuff. It's like, think of it like this. There are martial arts experts walking around everywhere. The
Mm,
chance of you getting into a fight with one and them just murdering you, kung fuing you, is really low. The chance of you going to a cafe with some hacker, somebody who knows what they're doing, really set up to steal information, it's pretty low. But they're out there and it's possible. So you want a VPN. It basically protects your internet connection from your phone or laptop to whatever you're browsing. Um, and I think, I guess, a better analogy is, if you imagine a helicopter
mm,
watching you as you leave your house, it can see everywhere you go. As you go to that store, you go to this friend's house, you go here, go there. A VPN is pretty much a subway tunnel. So that
mm,
helicopter, whoever's watching from the outside, internet service provider, somebody on your network, can see that you're going to the VPN, you're going to the subway. But what you do after the subway, where you exit out of, it's invisible to them.
mm.
So that's a good reason to use a VPN. But it's important to use a trustworthy VPN, because the VPN can see everything you're doing in theory.
And
If
I've
they
shared
really want it, yeah.
I shared some of your picks. Your third one, ExpressVPN, is what I've used for years because I spend so much time in China, and that's the one that has been most reliable for the specific China needs. I'm
Mhm.
curious. So I understand you mentioned phone. So phone on Wi-Fi, it's no different than say laptop on Wi-Fi. Phone on just the actual phone
Mhm.
data network. Is it important to be on a VPN there in terms of getting hacked, or just in terms of data tracking?
So it's not, yeah, so it's not so much in terms of the network,
Mhm,
since phone networks are basically distributed. It's not like you're on a shared network like a Wi-Fi network,
mhm,
but it can still protect you from the phone company potentially seeing all the stuff that you're browsing.
mhm,
And it might not seem like a big deal, most people can say, it doesn't matter, they can see everything, but they create these profiles about you
mhm.
that can be used to that they just sell. They just pretty much just flat out sell it. And then so they can use that data. Once the data is out there, they can use it in all sorts of ways. um, Plus, if you want to check out UK Netflix or German Netflix or whatever, you can just switch your location in the VPN, and it's very helpful. But for travelers, especially, it's a must. If you're traveling internationally, you definitely want to use a VPN.
Every time there's an Olympics, I start watching anything but U.S. coverage because I want to actually see the sports, not the soap opera stories about the athletes.
Yeah, and it can save you money with streaming services. A lot of times things are streaming on Amazon, but not Netflix in the US. But then if you switch your VPN to UK, you can then see them. So yeah, there are a lot of advantages, and a lot of countries where you don't, where things back home might be not such a big deal to be browse. There might be some news website you go to that could get you in trouble potentially. Um, Again, small chance, but possible.
All right, then we'll close with back to your revisit list. When assuming all travel regulations are lifted, of your revisit list, which is the first you'll make a beeline for?
Ooh. First country I would go back to. I've I kind of want to say Pakistan.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed it. It's in this time where it's developed enough to be traveled easily, relatively easily. It's safe enough to travel. I mean, this is perfectly fine to travel. For somebody who has some experience traveling, I think it's fine. But it's in this sweet spot where nobody is going there yet.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
kind of have the country to yourself in a sense. I was in Karachi and going to cafes, and people were buying me tea. Just they were like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And they were talking. They were buying me tea in a major city. That's pretty rare, I think, around the world. So you have that experience there, which I think, as the country does get more popular with tourism, which I think it will, you're probably going to lose. It just happens with popular places. So I'd probably want to go back there, but I don't know if I will soon. But you know, it'd be kind of at the top of my list.
And I mean, Karachi has had a reputation of less safe than say Islamabad or Lahore. Speak to Karachi as a destination.
Yeah, so Karachi is kind of interesting because it's like this bustling New Yorkish type of city, and it has a bad reputation for crime and all sorts of things. But you go there, it's pretty much just, yeah, it doesn't feel like that at all.
Mm,
I was walking around everywhere. I mean, I literally just would walk all across the city.
mm,
Never felt unsafe or odd. I mean, it's just this experience that was like, it was so surreal.
mm.
Um, but I think Lahore is definitely the city in Pakistan to visit. I think it's a very interesting city. Um, it's it's so diverse. It's right there, right in that border area. So it's I think if anything, if you're going to pick between Karachi and Lahore, I think Lahore kind of wins. But Karachi is also very interesting. The food, definitely great food in Karachi.
Fish karahi, the metal flat pan with the meat roast. Oh yeah, it's
And
incredible.
spicy.
I'll ask one bonus then, because you have been to the Wagah border ceremony.
Hmm.
You carry all of that gear. Let's just say you've got one shot at this ceremony. It's what is it? I've seen it actually from both sides. So it's like a 30, 45 minute spectacle. How do you document it? Which of your, I assume no, you don't dare with a drone there, but you've got cameras, you've got phones, you've got video, you've got still photo, you've got two hands, two legs. How are you pulling this off? What's the approach for something that, there's so many possible approaches.
I think for that one, almost you want to kind of go phone
Hmm.
in a sense, because more so than the ceremony, I think the crowd is interesting, especially the people sitting kind of right around you. If you can, they have that sort of, I guess, that tourist area, but just the people around you is really interesting. So a bigger camera might kind of put people off, but you can get some great shots and video of the spectators just all around you, which I think is interesting, more interesting even than what's going on at the border, to be honest. It
Hmm.
depends on which side on the border you're on too. So I think I'd probably have my big mirrorless camera out, but I think phone might get you actually more interesting shots of the crowd.
Hmm.
So
Fantastic. I like that approach. I'm thinking of my memories. It is the crowd because on one side it's Hindustan, on the other side it's Pakistan, and it's all men pretty much on the it's segregated and that on the Pakistan side, and it's yeah, it's such incredible people watching and such warmth of just a fun, joyous event almost, even if it's caused the root of it is something not so great.
I thought it would be much more tense. I mean, it's the nicest way to say "f you" to another country. I think it's got. I mean, if all border disputes were, like that, I think the world would be probably better off. It's pretty theatrical.
All right. Well, thank you, Anil, for joining us this evening, and what a great way to close.
Thanks for having me.